Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. It's 2 o'clock, right on the nose. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming today. There are some handouts in the back of the room. One is the impact report from this past year. You probably have already gotten a copy of it, but please feel free to take another one if you like. And then my presentation is back there. Martin's presentation is back there, and a copy of the flyer. So please feel free to take anything you like. Now is a good time to silence your phones, if you wouldn't mind. Today's presentation is being recorded on Zoom so that we will have a recording of it. We had a couple of people ask us, so we did do that. So I guess you don't need to know any more than that. It is just being recorded. No one can hear you speaking. They can only hear if we're speaking into the microphone. So say anything you like. So our format for today is that we're going to talk about understanding the power of endowments, the gift that gives forever. And I'm going to do this welcome, and then I'm going to invite Dr. Myers to come up and speak about his experiences with endowments and a little bit about his questions that he's had about the foundation. There are many. And so that's why we're here today, to try to answer some of those questions for you. You're going to hear a lot of information today. So please, just try to follow along. I'm happy to talk to you afterward about this if you have some more questions, but we will be covering a lot of territory today. So, and then I'll come back and speak and try to answer some of those questions that Dr. Myers had during his presentation. So without further ado, please welcome Martin Myers.
Yeah, get this open here. Thank you all for coming, and coming right after lunch is a challenge because it really is supposed to be nap time. So why am I speaking today? I mean, I'm not on the board. Go ahead and I'm not on the board. I'm not going to be asking you to give any money. I'll get that right off the start. I'm a resident. I'm a donor or potential donor, I guess. And I think Becky, I've been asking her a lot of questions. And those of you who know me know I'm a storyteller. And I have to say, when I first met Don Postuma, he said, "You asked a lot of questions, and if you're not careful, people are going to ask you to talk about stuff." So I guess that's part of my problem. So I'm a pediatrician. I wear a bow tie. I have a pediatric tie on today, just specifically for that reason. And I want to mention that because we have a gaggle of pediatricians here. And of the four of us on campus, Jim Caroly is the only one that you really does or did what you think of as a pediatrician. He was a real pediatrician, sat in office, took care of children, talked to mothers. And Jim Marks, he's an epidemiologist. He was talking about that with us. He studies disease in populations and made health policy for children, oriented towards children. And Ralph Kaufman, he's a pharmacologist. Children metabolize drugs differently than us adults. And me, I'm a herpes virologist. Cold sores, chicken pox. You get me wound up about chicken pox and shingles, and I can talk for a long time. And that's what I did for most of my early career. And I always have to tell a joke. So the herpes virologist jokes are, as you might imagine, sometimes a little off color. The difference between herpes and true love, right? Herpes is forever. And about the herpes virologists, you can always pick them out in the bathroom. They're the ones that wash their hands when they go in. So I ran a laboratory. I ran infection control for a large children's hospital. Um, I diagnosed and cared for children with complex infectious diseases. And then later on in children's hospitals, um, I started taking leadership roles. I became a chairman of pediatrics and a head of a children's hospital. And I think that's really why Becky wanted me to talk. So there are a lot of children's hospitals all around the world. And you might say, why? Well, children really are different. We're pretty standardized size, but children, they're not standardized, and they change very much over time. And uh, they're very different, and their care is very expensive if you think about it. Children with birth defects take a lot of money to care for them. So um, there are a lot of children's hospitals, and the one thing they have in common is they all lose money. They're designed to lose money. Well, there are a few of them that take only private patients, people who know you can pay, but the vast majority of children's hospitals were created to take care of children because they're often young families, they're underinsured. By definition, until the Affordable Care Act, many of them had predetermined conditions, a birth defect. You don't think about that as a predetermined condition, do you? But a child with a heart defect, predetermined, not insured. So children's hospitals lose money, and they're really dependent on their endowments. So that's what, I guess, why I'm here. So what did I do at children's hospitals? Well, the first thing was I was a recipient of a lot of philanthropy. I got a lot of money from unrestricted gifts, from restricted gifts, and endowments. And then I became a development officer. I did go out and raise money. In fact, this is one of the few times I've been invited to talk to a foundation that you're not serving me huge shrimp. And then, of course, I'm a donor. So my experiences with foundations, the children, I'm going to talk specifically about one children's hospital now, the Cincinnati Children's Hospital. I was recruited there, and my family was recruited there, of course, too. And my laboratory, the other faculty, some of my technicians, postdoctoral students, and so on. And they built me a brand new laboratory and equipped it. All that came out of foundation money. Now, the endowment fund brought me there. That was thanks to a wealthy individual who in the 1930s gave a huge endowment to establish the Children's Hospital. And that was a new program. But my laboratory was all new stuff. Those were unrestricted and restricted funds. And then a few years later, Becky likes the story. I got a call that the chairman of the board, foundation board, would like to have breakfast with me, get to know me. So I went to breakfast, and we were having a nice conversation. He said, "You know, Myers, you're really expensive." I said, "I beg your pardon, sir. I get all this grant money. I'm seeing patients. I bring all this. I cover my salary and everything. I'm not expensive. I'm a really good deal." And he said, "Well, that's all true and everything. But you know, when you first came here, you remember all those hand washing sinks you made us put in? That cost us a couple $1 million. And you know, you have to have plumbers and maintenance for all those things. That was expensive. And then you required that we immunize everybody in the hospital against all those diseases. Those vaccines, that cost $1 million. And then you helped develop that vaccine that closed down 10% of our beds. I mean, we're losing money. You're expensive. You're doing such a good job. we're going to give you an endowed chair. So they gave me an endowed chair. You may not know what that is. That means they said, we value enough that we have an endowment that's going to pay your salary forever, your salary and your benefits. Now, what that means to a faculty member is going to pay your salary, which means when I got 30% of my salary from the NIH, I got to spend the salary. No, I couldn't go to the Caribbean, but I could hire a postdoc. It's a real plum. When you hear somebody has an endowed chair, you should take notice, because that means the institution really values their program. So it came with a few little strings attached. Now that you have this endowed chair, we'd like you to come talk to some of our donors. And I got to go talk to donors a lot because I was very enthusiastic about raising money. So I got trained in development. And then over the years, there were things I needed in my laboratory, and the foundation would ask me every year, what do you need? Well, one of my junior faculty, she needed a really expensive microscope. I mean, a really fancy, expensive microscope. And NIH said, well, you know, you can go across the street to one and use theirs. And so you don't really, we're not going to pay for that. Well, the foundation raised the money for her. And you know what? A couple of years later, she got her own freestanding grant, a whole lot of money coming into the laboratory because she had her own microscope. The foundation had bought her something really valuable. So then I left Cincinnati and went to another institution, and my laboratory, that expensive microscope and a lot of other equipment, and my endowment stayed there. In fact, as I was preparing to talk today, I realized that this is the 40th anniversary of when I got that endowed chair. 40 years it's been supporting the Albert Sabin Professor of Pediatric Infectious Diseases. That's pretty amazing. This is the fourth recipient of that endowed chair. Endowments are the gift that keep on giving and keep on giving. 40 years, that's a long time to support a vulnerable program. If you think about it, my program is vulnerable. If you were a business person running that children's hospital, you would have cut my program right out. But the board said, what we're in the business of is taking care of children. Keeping them out of the hospital is a good idea. That's a valuable but vulnerable program. So I've been driving Becky crazy, as she said. I ask a lot of questions. So let's just run through these. What's it do? Well, that's your impact. How's it do it? Not completely clear. How's it run? What's it cost to run it? And what does it need? Those are the big questions about every foundation. So let's talk about foundation expenses. The first, what's called the expense ratio for a charity, is how much are its expenses divided by its available money it can spend, its expense ratio. And the expense ratio this last year is 0.098. That gives it an A minus in most charitable organizations. Well, we have to calculate in that they had a huge gift this last year. And in fact, it was about 0.198 if you take that one gift out. That gives it about a B plus. And how much does it cost to run the foundation? How much money do they have to spend to raise money? And it's about $18 per $100. That's about a B by most charitable organizations. So it's doing pretty well. One of the things I care about as a donor is how much of my money are they going to, how much are they going to deduct? Are they going to, how much is going to be spent for what I want? And one of the things that is really good about this foundation is all of it. They don't take a dean's tax. What's a dean's tax? Well, if you work in universities, you know the dean's tax, you know to love it. Whatever your income you have, the dean takes 5% of it. So there is none of that. So here's a place that I have trouble with the Glacier Hills Foundation, is I don't know what they need. I don't know what they want. So they need to tell us that. Such as unrestricted funds can be perhaps for ongoing needs. For example, our community providers that come and pick us up when we fall down, we have a contract for that. And it's going to expire this year. That could be unrestricted, or it could be restricted or dedicated to that contract. Either way, they could say, we need this, and we'd like you to donate to it. And then we could talk about endowment funds. The Tuition for Tots program apparently needs more money. We keep hearing about new educational scholarships. But the thing I highlighted here is I'd like you to think about vulnerable programs, because that's where endowments belong. So what are the vulnerable programs? I don't know. You need to tell us. Is Priscilla's wonderful music program, is that vulnerable? Her salary apparently is paid for by Trinity. I don't know if that's vulnerable. All of the programs that she puts on are paid for by the foundation. Should that be endowed? But these are things that we need to be told. So we all have limited resources. You know, everybody wants our money, and we have to decide who we're going to give it to. So when you give your money, think about the fact it can be restricted for how you want it spent, and how long it's going to last. It can be spent this year, or do you want it spent over time? Endowments are particularly good for vulnerable programs. Whatever you give it for, you should always give it for something, even if you're giving it for whatever you need it for most. But it should always be specified what you're giving it for. How do you want it? If it's an endowment, how do you want it spent? Do you want the income only? Usually 2.5%. If it's invested wisely, it may generate 4 to 5%. Do you want 4% or 5%? What about the principal? Can it be spent ever? Are there emergency circumstances where it can be? And what happens if it becomes obsolete? If you've endowed iron lungs, that money's not much used anymore. What do you want them to do with it if the purpose that you set up your endowment for doesn't exist anymore? This is something that really annoys me about a lot of foundations. They don't bother to tell me how they're spending my money. I often don't get annual reports. I don't get a report that says, oh, that nice gift that you gave us for that endowment, this is how we spent it last year. I actually usually write people letters if they don't tell me that, because it annoys me so much, and they're not likely to get my money again. And then there's the issue of endowments take a lot of money. Most of us don't have huge amounts of money to give. And what some of my classmates and I did, we decided that medical education has gotten awful expensive, and we should fund scholarship. So we talked about it, and none of us could provide $500,000 or $1 million to give a scholarship to a medical student. So we all got together and we said, let's do it together. And so we did. First year, between us all, we raised about $50,000. The university said, we'll put it in an account for you, but there's not enough to spend. Well, that was 15 years ago, and it's now $750,000. And the class of 1967 medical scholarship exists. The full scholarship for a medical student, doing it together over time. So to summarize, you need to know what the charity does, how it does it, how it's run, what it costs, and what it needs. Consider an endowment, because endowments work over time. They're gifts that continue and continue. And the foundation, bottom line here, is it's a pretty good one. It's unique. I don't know any other CCRC that has one. It does a pretty good job of giving things to us that we want. But I wish you guys would tell us what you want, so we know what we're giving to. And remember, we only have so much money, and you need to give us a compelling reason as to why we should give it to you. So that's my spiel.
Thank you so much for that. So what I'm going to do now is spend some time answering some of those questions. John, could you go to the next slide? So we're going to talk about what funds are held by the foundation, what the characteristics are of those funds, what exactly is an endowment, what funds are endowed, what our spending policy is, how we distribute funds, and what our funding priorities are with the foundation. So we have 51 funds that are held by the foundation. That's a lot. And they're divided into different categories. Each one of those funds has two main characteristics that are determined by you, the donor. The donor determines what we can spend that money on and how much of it we can spend it on. So remember the how, or the what and the how much, because I'm going to come back to that a little bit at a time. Our funds, our 51 funds total over $13 million. Next slide, John. Okay. So those three characteristics, there's different ways that a foundation can hold money. One way is it can be unrestricted. Many of you give unrestricted donations. And with an unrestricted donation, that means the what we can use it for, and the how much we can use it are unrestricted. We can use it all, and we can use it on whatever we need it for. That's an unrestricted donation. We have $33.1 million in unrestricted dollars right now. Those two big donations that we got, those big bequests, were both unrestricted, which is why our fund is so high. And then there are temporarily restricted donations, and those are exactly what it sounds like. They're temporarily restricted until we spend it on what you say we can spend it on. So you've determined what it can be spent on. That's restricted by you. But we can use all of it. Okay? And then the third, and where we're going to spend most of our time today, is on a permanently restricted fund. And that means that the what we can spend it on and the how much we can spend are both restricted. Okay? So there's three different kinds of funds. So let's focus today on the permanently restricted. So we have 22 endowments. Another name for a permanently restricted fund is an endowment. We have 22 of those that are endowed. So again, it's the what and the how much is restricted by you. 72% of our funds, so 10 million of our 13 million, are permanently restricted. That's high. That's high for a foundation. I've worked in several foundations, and that's high. And our investments, so how are they invested? Where they're invested through Trinity, and they're commingled with other Trinity Foundation funds. All of our investments are. So, what is an endowment? The definition of an endowment is that it's a sum of money gifted to an organization to be used for a specific purpose. The gift is invested and the interest only is used. So, for instance, we have two different types of endowments. We have true endowments and quasi endowments. A true endowment means, and we have 10 of those, means that the donor, you have said that you may never touch the core of that money. So let's say you gave $100,000 and you said it must be used as a permanently restricted endowment. We can only spend the interest off of that. We can never touch the $100,000. So hence the gift that keeps on giving. Then there's also what we call a quasi endowment, or sometimes people call that a board designated endowment. And that's a fund that acts like an endowment where we try not to touch the core, but we may touch the core if we ever need to. And that, again, is determined either by the board or by the donor. So the next slide, John. So our spending policy, which means, so you give us $100,000 and you say it must be in a permanently restricted endowment, we can only spend our spending policy, and every organization has a spending policy to tell you how much they actually spend and how they calculate it on their endowed funds. We spend only 4% calculated on 16 trailing quarters. So we look at the last 4 years and what that fund is, and then we average those and take 4% of that average over the last 16 quarters. We even break it down by quarter. Most organizations do, because what that does is it accounts for the fluxes in the market. So if it's very high at one point and very low at one point, it can average things out over time, and that's normal. So again, that example of $100,000. The simple math on that would say that we would spend $4,000 annually. Yes, $4,000 annually on a $100,000 endowed fund, or on a $10 million endowment, we would spend $400,000 annually. That's what's available to spend on 4% on 16 trailing quarters. There are some caveats in that based on bylaws and gifting agreements. Like we have almost all of our funds, we spend 4% on 16 trailing quarters, but we have 2 scholarships where the donor said, I want you to spend 5% on the calculated over time. So that one spends a little bit more. And we honored those because that was before we did our across the board spending policy. Those funds are calculated, John, on July 1st of every year. He calculates how much will be distributable out of that $10 million of endowed funds, how much is distributable in the next fiscal year, and that's how much we have to spend out of that. So when our grant time comes available, and we say we can spend $300,000 from the campus fund and $50,000 from the annual grants, that's what that calculation is. That's how much we have to spend. So, what funds do we have that are true endowments? So these are our 10 true endowed funds. These are the ones that the donor said you may never touch the core of these funds. You can only spend the interest off of them, or a portion of the interest, actually. So what I've shown you here is the fund balance and then the distributable amount last year, so figured on July 1 of 2023. So Tuition for Tots is our biggest fund. That was given by a donor here, a resident who said that they wanted this to be an endowed fund. They gave us $425,000 at the time, so it has grown a little bit since then, but again, it will go like this. And the distributable amount was $17,000 last year. And we're going to come back to that fund in a few minutes because that fund is in need of some funding. And I'll tell you why in a few minutes. But then we have the Memory Care Excellence Endowment. That was actually established years ago when Stephen Dobson, the Dobson is named after Stephen Dobson, when he ran the campaign here for memory care excellence, there was a certain amount of funds that was to be spent on building the Dobson, the actual building. And then whatever was left over in the fund after the building was built was to form this memory care excellence endowment. And that right now is $260,000. So that throws off about $16,000 a year for them to use in certain projects. The rest of them are all scholarships that have been endowed by donors, by past residents or current residents. And you'll see the ones that have the double asterisk next to them, Molly Dobson and the Brems. Those are the 5% ones that the gift agreement that we signed with them said you have to spend 5%. Or you may spend 5%. And then the next slide is about what funds that we have, the rest of them, which are 12, I believe, are quasi-endowed funds. Those are funds that, remember, we can go into the core if we have to, because the gift agreements or the bylaws say that we can, but we try not to. The largest one there is the 6.2, almost 6.25 million. And that's the campus fund endowment. That was the money that when Trinity bought Glacier Hills, there was a big exchange of funds. The foundation got 6.25 million of that. And that makes up the campus fund. We're in the process of distributing grants from that fund right now. Our committee has already met, and the board will meet on June 4th to decide what's going to be distributed from that. But there's 258,000 available. That's our biggest endowment at this point. And actually, what the guidelines say is that we can spend 4% on 16 trailing quarters, or we can go up to double that amount if there's a compelling need that year. And last year we did. Last year we spent 6.25%. And this year we might also, because there are compelling needs right now. And then the second one is the general endowment. The reason I highlighted those two is because those two are where our grants program comes from every year. So the annual grants that we do every year come from the general endowment. And that fund balance is 1.2 million. And we distribute about $50,000 annually. And those are the programs that you see. All the life enrichment programs and the spiritual care program and the library and things like that. Those are all funded through that. And then the rest are funds that have, and many of them are scholarships, but there are funds that have existed here for a while. I can spend time talking about them if you like, or I can go on and talk a little bit more about what our needs are. And I think you want to know more about what our needs are. So I'm going to go on. So what are our funding priorities? About a year and a half ago, the foundation met in a retreat format. And that was right after we had found out that the Amelia Kramer gift of $2 million was on its way, and we had already received the $1 million from Herman Miller. So we had $3 million there that was unrestricted. So what are our priorities and what do we need to fund here? So we did a retreat, and we came up with two major bullet points of what our funding priorities would be. The first one is to maintain excellence in our Glacier Hills community. And that means really setting the bar high. The foundation, operations will fund the basics, but the foundation is here to really set that bar high to make sure that we are the best retirement community around. And that's both with beautification, technology, wellness, and enrichment. Am I on the wrong slide? Oh, I am. Okay. So you'll go back to that one because I did skip one. Yeah, that's okay. I'll come back to that one. So these four areas, you can see projects that we've funded for year after year, just in these, like in beautification, landscaping. There's many projects that we fund in landscaping. The Taking Root campaign just was last year, and we still have a little bit more. We need about $6,000 more in that fund to be able to fund exactly what we said we were going to fund. Grounds, facilities equipment, lobby flowers. In technology, connected living. We actually funded those screens that you see in the lobbies that are really not very functional right now, but we're working on it. The Hey Google project, that some of you have a Hey Google device in your apartment, a low vision support, the Hanson Room AV, all of this audiovisual equipment that you see in here was funded through the foundation. Wellness, all the yoga classes, all the fitness equipment, all the spiritual care program, all the dementia education, those programs were all funded through foundation, through your gifts or through grants. And then enrichment, which is probably the biggest category that you all benefit from and enjoy. Our library, our concerts, our educational offerings, social hours, ice cream machine, an art program, and an art cafe. All those programs were funded through gifts to the foundation or grants that have come from the foundation. And then if you go back one slide, because I know I missed that. In the other bullet point of our priorities are to provide charitable gestures in challenging times. Well, is this a challenging time? Yes, it has been very much for Glacier Hills. Glacier Hills loses money every month. And individuals are struggling also after COVID, during and after COVID. So educational scholarships. We fund a lot of educational scholarships, but two of the funds right now that are in need of support are the specialized education and the employee plus. Specialized education is a separate fund that if, let's say, a student has decided in the fall that they're going to go to school in January. They're too late for the fall winter cycle and they're too early for the spring summer cycle. So how do they get a scholarship? The Specialized Education Fund will fund that gap for just that one term for them to get through until we go through the next cycle. And it's usually about $2,000, but it does get them through that hump. And then also this fund will also fund opportunities for employees to either deepen their specialty or broaden their specialty. A good example of that might be a nurse who maybe wants to go and get a certification in wound care administration. That's a special certification. So we can fund that. Maybe one of our facilities people want to go and get certified in HVAC. We can do that through that fund. And we do very often. Eric Hausman right now, our chaplain, is at a conference, and that fund covered his registration fee for the conference. He's in Pittsburgh right now at a spiritual care conference. And then our Employee Plus scholarships. I think you've heard a lot about those in the past. Employee Plus means that it's the children of our employees can apply for this scholarship. The board said that once that fund got to $125,000, it would be endowed, board designated. Remember, the board has endowed it then. And it's only at $119,500. So we need a little bit more for that to actually be endowed so that it generates $5,000 a year. $2,500 for each semester. So we can give those away. We've given two away. One is Christy Gregory's son, and the other was Priscilla Johnson's daughter, who is now a nurse in the ER at the U of M. So it does good things. Child care support. We talked a little bit a while ago about tuition for tots. That fund is at $435,000. The donor who endowed it also signed over their refundable entrance fee. So when that person passes away or leaves, and usually it passes away, another $272,000 will come to that fund. So we will be at $700,000 at some point. But right now, the $435,000 generates only $17,000 annually. This year, our need in that fund is $27,000 because we have a lot of children being born here right now. And the business office and the foundation is responsible for over half of those. I don't know what's going on in there. But in order to be able to fund that time after time after time, no matter how the flux of children being born. Well, but maybe it's because we have so many pediatricians here, that they know that this is a good place to have children. But we would like to get that fund up to $1 million so that we don't have to fund the gap of what it. So this year we're going to be about $9,700 short. Some of you have given towards that in the spring appeal, but we're still about $3,000 short in that. So there's a need right there. Our employee financial assistance. So we've given over $84,000 in the last 5 years when we started this fund. And last year alone, it was 17,000, over 17,000. These are gifts that are only $1,000 a piece, where the employee says, I'm having a hard time right now. I can't pay my rent because I was off work for 2 months because I had a medical issue. I can pay my medical bills, but I can't pay my rent because of that. Or some other emergency. They're going to be evicted from their house, or their child has a medical emergency. There are heartbreaking cases that you just can't imagine. They're ongoing. Last year, like I said, we gave away 17,000. We are not on pace to give that much away this year. We're more at about 5,000 right now. We have a couple more months to go. So we probably won't get to 17,000 this year, but there's always need in that fund. Resident benevolence. So you outlive your financial resources. And it says in our contract with you that we will, if you're on a life plan contract with us, that we will help you through that time. There's a process that you go through, but there's always 1 or 2 people that are getting very near outliving their financial resources. And the need is usually between $100,000 and $200,000 annually. That's something you can give to. The board has voted not for that not to be a. The question was, is that part of Trinity's responsibility? It is, but it does not mean that it's minus of donors giving to it. If a donor would like to give to it, they may. And then aging in place. We're all aging in place, right? But what does that mean? Well, Dr. Myers talked a little bit about community paramedics. That's something that's been around for the last 30 months. And what the foundation does is fund that at $2,000 a month. We did it last time for 2 years. It's about to expire at the end of June. And that allows what we like to call urgent care in your home. So if you have a need that maybe is not emergent, but it's urgent, you can call 911 or the phone number for community paramedics. They'll come to your apartment. They'll treat you at the scene. And there's many different things that they can do during that. They can draw blood. They can test for a urinary tract infection. They can do wound care. They can help with your cleaning your Foley, many different things. As long as you're not taken to the hospital, if they don't transport you, then that's covered under our contract. It costs nothing for you. And that's funded through the foundation. Again, our contract is going to expire. We have a meeting this week with them to renegotiate that contract and then go back to the foundation to see if maybe the foundation will fund that again. And then transportation, something that's very near and dear to everyone on this campus. So the transportation expenses here are about $156,000 a year. The foundation subsidizes it for about $62,000 a year, and that was board designated that we would do that. They're coming up with one of our vehicles is a 2016, and it's aging. It needs to maybe be replaced at some point. And then also we don't have a smaller vehicle where we can maybe take 1 or 2 wheelchairs. But, it's hard to drive a bus around. Have you ever driven a bus around the streets of Ann Arbor? You can't be quite nimble, can you? But there are smaller vehicles that are being made now, vans. Chrysler Pacifica makes one of them, where you can put 2 wheelchairs in it and a couple of passengers, and it's much easier to navigate around the streets of, I like to say the streets of San Francisco, but it's Ann Arbor. So we may be in need for a $200,000 coming up. Maybe a capital campaign we'll have to raise that money to be able to replace those vehicles at some point. So there's just some of our, probably our most emergent needs in the foundation. I try to tell you about those when we do an annual fund, an annual appeal, like the end of the year or in the spring. And when I come talk to you one-on-one, I try to tell you about them, but it's a lot of information to remember. I get it. And then we try to put it in our annual impact report also to report on what we've done the previous year. That's a lot of information to share with you. But I wanted to show you this picture. So remember when I told you that the business office is having, I don't know, like a gaggle of children these days. On the left, that's Shayna Slewinski, our business office manager, and that's little Grace. And Grace was born in November of last year, and she's a full-time tuition for tots recipient. She goes 5 days a week, and she's an infant, so she's the most expensive of all of them. But Shayna only pays $600 a month. The foundation picks up the rest of it, which is about $900 is what the foundation picks up because it's almost $1,600 a month. On the right, that's William and Charlie and Liz. All William and Liz are employees here. Liz is in our business office. She works for Shayna. William's in our facilities department, and Charlie comes 3 days a week to the Child Development Center. So the whole family comes every day. Well, not every day, 3 days a week. But they pay $600 a month also. And that fund is enabling that. So there's a lot of things that your donations do and a lot of different ways and a lot of complexity in how we track funds and how we pay bills and how we are able to fund these grants. And I'm happy to talk to you more about those anytime. But right now, I think we'll end the presentation and see if there's any questions that you all have.